All right, there was a lot of affinity for a post I did last week where I was talking about the brain puke in an early visual identity exploration for a branding project. So what I'm going to walk through here is this is basically a combination of 4 rounds of branding exploration for a restaurant. It was a Cuban restaurant based in Cincinnati. They're currently no longer around. However, this exploration, what this highlights is what the creative process kind of looks like. This is 4 rounds copied and pasted into one artboard. So I'm going to zoom in and kind of go through things individually and talk you through a little bit of the process. Of course, what is not represented or what is not shown here is the initial creative brief and the strategic foundation that was laid, that was approved by the client prior to ever getting to this point. So before we ever design anything, we have already aligned with the client the mission, the vision, the values, like how the brand is going to show up, what are the unique characteristics of the business, what's unique about the restaurant, how do they want to be seen or described by the public. All of these things have previously been defined, and then we start this visual identity exploration. So to zoom in here, I'm going to highlight again a little bit of this process. This is not a linear process by any means. So what we go through here is not exactly how it happened, it's just how copy pasted it. So generally speaking, we start with initial typographic exploration. So we know this is a Cuban restaurant and rum bar. So we're looking for typography that is evocative of those things. Maybe it feels a little bit vacation oriented, or maybe it does feel, Spanish inspired or Cuban inspired or Latino inspired in some capacity. There's certainly like a vibe that we're going through based also on the research that we did, looking at signage and things that are painted on the streets of Cuba. We certainly wanted to allow that to inspire some of our thinking. As we continue to explore typography, we start to explore things like iconography, symbolism, graphics, illustrations. So something like this Amador, we started to see an opportunity to customize the A, and then maybe the A ultimately starts to inform a visual graphic language that can be used, on the back menus or on coasters. So we continue to explore stuff like that, things like these unique shapes that start to happen, maybe inspired by a sunrise or a sunset on the beach. Continuing to explore marks, graphics. At some point, we realized that flamingos are native to Cuba, so we started to explore something like that. Maybe it's just a flamingo standing. Maybe it's simple, inspired by the shape of a straw, or maybe it's part of a drink. Obviously, it's a rum bar, so it's applicable for it to be in the shape of a daiquiri glass, maybe. So tons of explorations here. I will also note here that a lot of what we explore kind of in early round 1, we are using found materials at times. So using FPO assets for placement only. So things that we will just pull from the internet, we will let the client certainly know that like this is not ours, we did not make this. This is a reference material for us to say, if you like this, we will create something that has a similar vibe or evokes a similar feeling. We continue to explore type. We start to explore color. At some point we start to get locked in on things and really explore how does color work together. Maybe we make it intentionally visually vibrating, or maybe we do explore a little bit more of a monochromatic or analogous color system. Explore things like patterning. So maybe there's an opportunity to explore different type styles, kind of a handwritten script, a little bit of a sign-off feel. Again, none of this stuff is super prescriptive as much as it is our brain puke, allowing our brains to explode onto the digital canvas and see what feels good and what feels. Some of the stuff, maybe it's inspired by something like a vintage luggage tag. Again, evoking this feeling of you are escaping where you're currently at as you go to this restaurant experience. Exploring more graphics. Some of these we start to build a little bit of a brand palette, if you will. So we start to look at things like copywriting, graphics, colors, typography, illustrations, photography, really starting to establish the art direction thinking for some of these brands. Again, this is all kind of round 1 and some round 2 where we started to push stuff a little bit further, refine some things. Here again, a brand palette, if you will, where we started to explore this idea of a cast shadow. So as if it's a Cuban sunrise shining on Amador, casting that shadow behind it, playing with some fun type. This little illustration of a flamingo with an A between his legs. This is all early on stuff, so nothing is too tight or too refined. At some point, to come back up here, the client feedback was something to the effect of, we want to see some more leafy patterns, something that can be used on the back of menus, or maybe coasters, maybe wallpaper. So we started to explore that. We also got a directive at some point to explore more of the flamingos. So you'll see in a moment here, as we start to lock in on typographic styles that are getting approved by the client, we're looking at various ways and container shapes to hold that typography. We then start to explore various ways to represent a flamingo. At some point the concept was approved, and a billion ways you can represent a flamingo. So some of it's weird, some of it's monoline, some of it's detailed, some of it's painterly, some of it's incredibly minimal. At this point, we didn't really know what the client was going to be drawn to, so we're exploring a little bit of everything. We had previously presented a few illustration styles, so in some ways we did have some idea of what may make sense to push towards. Continue to explore carrier shapes, color usage, style of flamingo, looking at different colorways of a similar brand system. And again, at some point throughout the process, we start to get approval on some things. The direction starts to lock in a little bit more. We start to get locked in on a type style. So we start to explore things like crest shapes, coasters, menu items, icon styles. And last but not least, when we finally get approval, we start to create the brand guidelines. So for a restaurant, at least a restaurant of the size that Amador was, we weren't creating anything super comprehensive. We just wanted to create general rules. So we brought in a little bit of the tone, who is this brand, explained what the primary logos, secondary logos, logo type with tagline, the flamingo mark, the crests, some usage and safe areas, some do's and don'ts, color palette, typography. Honestly, there's nothing super new or unique about what is presented here. We simply want to ensure that we describe how the type is used. Photography styles, that wasn't something that we necessarily shot, but we did want to give them directive for how to do it in a way that aligns with our vision for the brand. How to use borders and patterns, and brand collateral. So some of these things we didn't necessarily create for them, but we did want to give direction for them if they created them themselves. And things like signage. Ultimately, this was not a sign that we necessarily set up the production files for our client. However, we did show this as a mock-up, and this exact sign was created. Things like menu treatments, and that's it. So again, I did want to just highlight a little bit more of the thinking of that initial brain puke. As I noted, that was a few rounds of design kind of all thrown into one artboard. However, I just did want to present this, offer an opportunity to answer questions about that creative process, and see if there's anything else that you guys would like to see about creating a brand system or sharing brand design process and thinking with clients. Thanks, y'all.